I mean, half of that groove is just that piercing clap sound. But what's also beautiful about this particular program here, I love the snare down here. I don't know why, it has sort of a tight feel to it. Isn't that cool? So tight. Hi there and welcome to yet another episode in Soundpaint. In today's episode, we're going to go into our Hip Hop 102 Boogie Mars library. This is a high-end drum production kit purely designed for top 40 music in mind. Think R&B, think hip hop, think maybe a little bit leaning into trap and sometimes dubstep as well. But for this library here as well, think about the 80s too. The 80s is quite popular in top 40. We spent about the last 2.5 years really studying top 40 in great length and all the different artists Boogie Mars implied, and then trying to bring our own sort of version to the game. A lot of us have gotten used to having sort of single shot samples on the keys. You got your bass drum, you got your snare drum, but in Soundpaint it's different. These are production kits. You do get your bass drum, your hi-hat, your snare, your claps and all that stuff, but each of them has 127 different velocity layers using the power of Soundpaint. That means that the kits are more expressive. I can almost play them a little bit like acoustic drum kits. But let's not talk about it. Let's just get into the library. This library is best described as big-voiced, booming, badass, boogie kind of style of library. We're somewhere between modern, we're somewhere back in the 80s at the same time. You're gonna hear me render both sort of variations as we just jam here on the keys. So yeah, let's get inside. This first program here is clearly an homage to the 80s styles. Aha, Take On Me. And you'll notice here on the Mart wheel that things get a little bit sharper when I move it up here. One thing I learned in really deep studying top 40 is how simple the production is, but it might be simple in the sense that sometimes you don't even have a hi-hat. It's just like that kind of style, but the sounds have to be a really, really good quality. So for example here, you'll notice that, for example, the bass drum is dry. The snare drum has a little bit of verb to it, but that clap has a little more of that sort of accentuation. So when you do a groove like, you get more of that, very typical in pop music as well. But this is just one example out of many. There are 5 different kits in this library here. They're all laid out per octave. You got bass drum, hi-hat, snare drum, open hi-hat, clap, and so forth. And then you have additional bass drums on these keys here, which are shorter. So you get the more boomy one in C and the more shorter one in G. And then sort of alternative percussion and toms on the remaining keys. That's the velocity action right there. So 127 layers on every single key. Next up is the bobblehead. So as you know, we got the kits here. But in the upper octaves up here, I have more auxiliary type of sounds. So for example, those sort of snaps and pops, they're all up here. And these are velocity based as well. So that's why I say it's not your single shot sample. These are more sort of jammable kits, which is also why even when I play stuff like hi-hats and bass drums, sometimes we'll have filters on the hi-hat. It will sort of slowly open up. Sometimes the sound will become a little bit longer. We're using all sort of production elements to sort of heat up the sound in respect to what's good for this particular sound. So different production methods for every single key here, but really giving you that sort of more, the best way to describe it is like an acoustic kit. mean, this one is so classic 80s. Every program inside of hip-hop has a corresponding arpeggiation as well. These are just grooves that are made to sort of exemplify what I think the style is for this particular kit and the way it's designed. This one being an homage to Bad Bunny, that sort of very popular reggaeton kind of style. And really, that is how simple some of the productions can be. Well, simple. It's been years for us to generate these sounds, but really simple in terms of how you lay out the groove. You don't want it too complicated and just accentuate with very simple sounds. I say that because years ago, I was doing a bunch of remixing for larger bands. And what I learned with both rock and pop is that the production needs to be very, very simple and very, very clean. The ear simply reads it better. It's easier said than done. So while this might seem almost musically insulting, that's sort of the way it is. But the production quality of the sounds themselves just needs to be of that sort of high value. So you can do something like a bass drum and that sort of conga-like feel, and then a nasty, nasty 808 cowbell, like this baby here. Maybe you could even do like a... And you'll see sometimes that I'll try to borrow, because we have complete symmetry from the different kits here, borrow elements. So I didn't like this hi-hat here so much in context to the cowbell. So I'll be looking for other sort of styles. This one is a little tighter up here. That's how simple it is. All right, let's go downtown. If you notice here on the Mart wheel, I'm moving it up and down, and that's corresponding to the rack time module inside of the engine, meaning that I'm taking these tiny drum sounds and using time stretch on them. So you get this sort of super tight sound on the keys here, moving the Mart wheel up. But as I move it down, and that's a very interesting effect on drums in my opinion, because now there's no reverb here. But because I'm so down and slowing time down, you could almost get a reverb-like quality out of it. Or a clap here. This one here, you almost can't hear it. There's a tiny little bit of like plate reverb in it. But as we go down in time here, it's now a hall. So from like near dry studio, we almost have these sort of stadium claps. I just could not get myself to do that one. Let me just take this tiny sound here, do one note stretch. Let's see what it sounds like down at the bottom here. You'll notice here I also use micro pitch up here in the parts module to do more sort of variation. So the harder I click velocities, the more sort of pitch variation we get. Cute. Here's just the main part. Main means that this is the raw representation of what the kits sound like without sort of any effects or additional racks to them. This next one here is a clear throwback to the great Max Martin as well. Again, very, very simple production, but with that sort of clean sound to it. Everything is sort of pristinely sitting well together. So it may sound simple, but I can assure you it was not that simple to create these samples, like to really sort of get that sweet pocket. And because everything is velocity based, I can also go in here and let's change the hi-hats a little bit, like create a little bit of a different feel. This next one here was a strange experiment. I essentially activated our morph feature here, and then I mirrored the same part into itself, but this guy over here is 12 semitones up, so I'm morphing the kit with itself, but the part I'm morphing to is an octave higher. It creates this very sort of unique tonal kind of kit. Isn't that cool? So as I move the mod wheel down here, I'm gradually morphing the kit. And I think for me, the sweet spot is like right in between. And as I pointed out earlier on, I sort of played the same thing here, but we have a particular like Electro-friendly like program here. I mean, half of that groove is just that piercing clap sound. But what's also beautiful about this particular program here, I love the snare down here. I don't know why, it has sort of a tight feel to it. Isn't that cool? So tight. Here's just a pure old school vibe, 80s. And you hear like how simple it is. The bass drum's so clear. We get that snare on the fourth, but other than that, it's very sort of dry style. And I should also mention that when you look at the effects rack here in general, that it's very simple. There's a little bit of compression, there's a little bit of EQ on it here. I like to sort of tailor that specifically to the type of music and what my ear likes sometimes. But generally speaking, not too many effects on these things. It's already done. We've already polished that and baked it into the samples in a very, very subtle way. But just so you don't have to sit and sort of fiddle with all the typical production nonsense. But I love this one here. Very old school, very, very tight. And for pop production as well, like normally when I jam with a drum kit, the hi-hat will just be going like all the time, like. But often with pop, you don't always want that hi-hat on every single hit. So it's quite typical that you'll do a groove where you leave out the hi-hat on the bass drum. It just reads a little bit cleaner instead of. Here's some like good old like shuffling for you. And going more like down tempo, slow. And again, very, very simple. Here's another one, simply called the snap. But we don't just have to think about this library as a typical sort of production tool for top 40, hip hop, R&B, those kind of styles. I can also use it in a more filmic way. This for me was more of a ballad kind of vibe to it. If I go into the effects here, look at the plate reverb, you'll notice that the pre-delay is set pretty high, so you get that sort of delayed. Very sort of effective for slow ballads, but still with like fast moving parts. It's tight and like light, but it has some kind of like. I love that sound. This snare. Distortion. Yeah, a little bit of that. I'm gonna see if I can make like a nasty like breakbeat kit here just to wrap it up. Let's put a little bit of time here as well. really nasty down here. And it is amazing with that time module. I move it up here, and all of a sudden, even with distortion on, we got a fairly like innocent kit. Let me just associate time here to my mod wheel. Just right click here, move my mod wheel, and then let's just see here. Let me just program this little beat in here so we can hear how much you can actually do variation just with time. So just a very, very simple beat here. I mean, down here. You see how the snare just gets longer and longer? What's that? The snare? Very cute up here. Ooh, I love that sound here. Let me just take a one note stretch on that. You know, sometimes you gotta break an egg to make some omelets. Boogie Mars became a little more than what was intended. This is Hip Hop 102 Boogie Mars. See you in the next one.